Welcome back. In this video we're going to begin working on our Scratch generation node. So I'm in a Blender startup file here just with the default cube, and let's just make it a little bit more fancy by adding a bevel to it. And we'll shade that smooth as well. Let's go to our shading workspace and let's just turn off the gizmos and the overlays, and also turn on cycles rendering, turn off scene world so we can use one of these HDRIs, and we'll just turn down the opacity so it's not too distracting. Now for the most part we're just going to be looking at the mask we're generating. We don't have to worry too much about the actual material on this object. So let's make a little bit of space by closing down that tab. And the scratches we're going to create here are going to be done using Voronoi texture. So we're going to add in a Voronoi texture. And let's just remind ourselves of the outputs from this. We have distance, which are these cells with a kind of radial gradient coming from the inside to the outside of each of these cells. We have color, which gives us all these random cell shapes with random colors. And we have position as well, which is very similar, but it gives you the vector position of each of these individual cells. Now we're going to be using color for this. Now let's first add in our texture coordinate and mapping nodes using Ctrl+T. We'll make sure we're on object mapping. Now it's very important that we stick to 3D for this, because if we went to 2D, you can see we just get a projection on our object and we get all these lines down the side, which is not what we want. So we'll stick to 3D. Now what we're going to do is duplicate both of these. So we'll duplicate using Ctrl+Shift+D, move these down. And now we're going to mix these two together and we're going to use difference. So if we increase this factor all the way up, you can see we have no difference whatsoever between these two maps. Now what we do want to do is we want to use color as our output. So I'm just going to use Control, left click and drag and move this. So immediately you can see that we do have a difference between these two noise maps. One still has that kind of grayscale radial gradient, which you can see in all these different colors, and the other one has colored cells. So we get quite a psychedelic pattern. But we're going to change them both to color, and you can see now we have absolutely no difference. So what we're going to do to adjust these is we are going to add a couple of different nodes in. We're going to grab a value node, plug this into the scale of this first one. So we'll duplicate using Shift and D. We're going to move this down and plug it into the scale of the second one. I'm going to change this to 0.5. I'm going to change this to 0.51. And immediately you can see we get these little lines. Now this is an interesting way of doing it, but unfortunately we don't have much control over generally the shape and random thickness of these lines. So instead of using value nodes, what we'll do is we'll just distort the vectors going into both of these. So let's grab a color, mix color node, plug this in. We'll choose linear light. We'll take the factor all the way down. We'll duplicate this and do the same here. And let's grab a noise texture. We'll plug in our object mapping to its vector. And we'll plug this factor into each of these two slots. Now if you just increase the factor on one of these, we're starting to get some more interesting lines. Now, it doesn't really matter which one you change, as long as you distort one of them. What I quite like to do is distort one of them to a certain value. Let's try 0.05, and then distort the other one to a very similar value. Let's try 0.045. And now we get these nice thin lines. They are a little bit wavy. If they're too wavy, we can change the scale of this noise texture to make them straighter. I don't want to go too crazy with this because later on we're going to add in controls to make all our scratches a little bit more wavy. So I think something like a scale of 2 will be fine. As far as detail goes, we want a little bit more detail. What you'll find is this starts to break up these lines a little bit. Roughness does the same thing, makes them a little bit more wavy. We don't want to go too strong with this because we don't want really scratchy lines like this. We want them to remain pretty solid. We can adjust our scale a little bit. Now, if these values are changing too fast, you can hold Shift an extra decimal of control. And just about here looks fine. We're getting a nice line there. Now, if we look at this from above, it does not look like scratches. It still looks like cells, but the trick to this is layering. We're going to layer another map on top of this. We're going to take essentially all of these nodes. Now, we don't want to change that, so I'll just shut that down. It saves a bit of space. We're going to grab all these nodes, use Control Shift and D, move these down. And then we're going to mix these two together. And this time, instead of difference, we're going to use multiply. We're going to increase that factor all the way up. And then we're just going to slightly adjust these factors. So increase that one a little bit, increase this one a little bit. And you can see as we increase this, we start to lose a lot of those scratches. So again, we'll use Shift just to move this very, very slightly. We just want to move this until we're just getting rid of the majority of these lines. So maybe around about there is fine. So you can see that if we really zoom in, we can start to see some of those colours. And generally over the surface, we've just got a few bits and bobs here and there. Now it's a little bit tricky to see this when it's all coloured. So let's grab the colour ramp node, plug this in, and then let's grab a converter math node. We're going to set this to greater than. And what we want is everything that's greater than black, we want to be pure white. So we'll take that threshold to 0. So now everything greater than 0 is now coming out as white, and we can really see what our scratches are doing there. So it looks like we need to adjust our scratches just a little bit. We maybe want to make them a little bit longer. Let's try a slight adjustment on our factors again. So let's just increase and decrease these down. So this is starting to get the kind of scratches I'm looking for. Adjust this one as well. Okay, going too much takes too much of that away. Okay, so something like this is a little bit more interesting. We're getting a lot of random scratches over our surface. And you can see quite a lot of the cell shape is still kind of visible, but once we layer another layer of scratches on top of this, it's going to be really hard to see these cell shapes. So essentially at this point, we have this whole set of nodes that generates this scratch map, but at the moment, I don't think this is complex enough. So we're going to take this entire group. We are going to Control Shift D and duplicate this down. We'll look at the output of this. Obviously, it's exactly the same as the output for the other one. Now we want to take this, change the scale, rotate it around, move it out of position, maybe change the thickness of these lines. And we can do that pretty easily with a Combine XYZ node. So Combine XYZ takes 3 values and turns it into vector coordinates. We can plug these into these 4 new mapping nodes. We'll plug it into rotation, and we'll plug it into scale. And we'll do that on all of these. Now, at the moment, I should point out the values in this Combine XYZ are all 0. So that essentially takes away all the information here. As soon as we put in a new value here, we should get something else appearing. Now you can see as we increase this, we start to get some really interesting results. I mean, this could be something you're interested in. Probably not. I'm going to take this down to about 0.5, 0.6 or so. There we go. And we now have a different map. So we have 2 maps here. We are going to move some of this out of the way. We are just going to combine these 2 nodes together. We can get rid of this color ramp and this greater than node. Now in this case, we are not going to multiply. We are going to add. We'll increase that factor all the way, and let's look at this greater than node. Okay, and now you can see we have a bunch of random scratches on the surface. Now some of these scratches are a little bit too thick. So let's just go in and adjust these factors and see if we can find those particular scratches. So this is layer 1, so I think this scratch is going to be on layer 2. Let's try here. Okay, so it's not in that layer. Let's go down to this setting here, move this. Okay, so that's the length of that scratch, it looks like. Let's decrease this. That's the other side of that scratch. So let's go back up a little bit. Aha, so this is the thickness of that scratch. So you can kind of see what's happening with these different factor controls. Some of them control the thickness of different lines. Some of them control the length. So if we increase this up, you can see this controls the thickness of quite a few of these scratches. So we can kind of really dial in any kind of problem areas that we have. So maybe this one here is another problem area. We'll try this one. That's not affecting that. Try and get that back to where it was. Find another one of these factors that seems to be quite high. Okay, so that's the length of that one. That's the other length of it. Let's take that down. Let's move up a little bit. And is this the width? Okay, so this is the width of that one. So now we can just take that down, make it a little bit more of a hairline scratch. Now, this will often bring in other issues that we then have to maybe go in and troubleshoot a little bit. It's best to have as many of these factors as low as possible. Sometimes it will take a little bit of hunting to find these problem areas. Okay, so there we go. Now, one other thing that I should point out is fixing one area might mess up other areas, so you just have to keep an eye on that. So at the moment, this is essentially our base scratch map. I think it looks pretty good so far. Now you could go even further and combine even more layers of scratches on top, but I think just having 2 layers is a good base amount of scratches. If you need more layers, once a node group's completed, you could always have 2 of those node groups with different scales, different vector coordinates, and layer them that way. At least this way, if we just use one scratch generator node, we're going to get some really interesting results anyway. So now that we actually have our nice, interesting looking scratches, let's have a look at what our outputs might be for this. So at the moment, we have these 2 nodes, this color ramp node and this greater than node. The greater than node is essentially outputting black and white values only. So if we zoom in, this is black and white. So this is going to be a good mask. This greater than node could be used as your mask to mask off 2 different materials. This color ramp node is essentially outputting grayscale here. This could be used for bump mapping, it could be used for color mapping and things like that. We could also export inverted masks here. So for example, if you want white with black scratches, so we'll just do color invert. And we could actually duplicate this and do the same here as well. So now we have 4 possible outputs for this scratch map. Okay, so it's challenge time. Your challenge in this video is to set up the initial node group and try and identify some suitable inputs for that node group. You don't necessarily have to connect them up just now. I'll be showing you that in the next video, but have a think about it and see if you come up with the same things as me. Connect and name each of the 4 outputs for the node group. So we have the scratch mask, inverted and uninverted, and we have the scratch map, inverted and uninverted. Just make sure you name them correctly and you turn them all into float values. So pause the video, have a go at that, and I'll see you in the next video and we'll finish setting up our scratch generator node. I'll see you then.